At my sister's wedding, she leaned in, her perfume as sweet and cloying as her lies, and whispered, "Go find another table, adopted girl." The table I'd paid 30 grand for gleamed under the chandeliers, a silent dare. What she didn't know was that I'd already traced every fraudulent wedding expense to a shell vendor siphoning funds from my company, with her fiancé's signature on every invoice. Tonight, I won't just throw a drink, I'll pull a single thread, and her entire charade will unravel. My name is Ava Mercer. At 32, I am the head of operations for Northbridge Dynamics, a position that rewards precision, foresight, and the dispassionate analysis of complex systems. Tonight, I am applying those skills to a different kind of system, my family. The Marigold Conservatory was Sloane's idea of a fairy tale, a cathedral of glass and wrought iron set in the manicured heart of Greyhaven. It was designed to make you feel like you were dining inside a snow globe. Warm, yellow light dripped from antique chandeliers, catching on the crystal glasses and the impossibly white tablecloths. Outside the towering panes of glass, a manicured twilight settled over the grounds, but inside, it was a perpetual golden hour. A string quartet, tucked away in an alcove of ferns, was breathing a wispy, melancholic version of Moon River into the air. The melody mingled with the scent of lilies and roasted duck, a fragrance of curated perfection. The low hum of polite conversation was punctuated by the delicate, rhythmic chime of silver against porcelain. It was a beautiful, meticulously constructed illusion, and I, as it turned out, was the primary investor. My phone screen glowed under the table, the cool, blue-white light a stark contrast to the venue's warm amber. I was doing one last check, a final reconciliation. It's a habit. Before any major operation goes live, you verify every line item, every logistical checkpoint, the final invoice from the caterer, the one I'd been CC'd on by Sloane's wedding planner, was open in my secure email app. I scrolled through the figures, my thumb moving with practiced efficiency. Everything appeared to be in order. The numbers added up. The problem was, I knew they added up in more than one ledger. Across the round table, my sister, Sloane Mercer, was a vision in cascades of ivory lace and tulle. She was radiant, a star in her own custom-built galaxy. Her smile, however, was something I'd learned to decode long ago. It was a masterpiece of social engineering, wide and dazzling but thin at the edges, sharp as a filleting knife. It never quite reached her eyes. Seated beside her, with a proprietary hand resting on the small of her back, was her new husband, Carter Vale. He called himself a financial consultant, which in my experience was a vague and aspirational title for someone who moved other people's money around. He had the kind of easy, polished charm that set off every alarm in my professional-grade risk assessment software. His eyes were quick, constantly scanning the room, assessing value, calculating angles. They'd landed on me more than once tonight, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before he'd turn his perfect smile back to an adoring guest. The clinking of a glass drew my attention from the screen. A toast was being proposed, as if on cue. A waiter with impeccable posture and starched white gloves moved around our table, refilling champagne flutes with a practiced, silent grace. Everyone reached for their glass. I placed my phone face down on my lap and picked up mine, the delicate stem cool against my fingertips. It was in that suspended moment, as the room quieted and all eyes turned toward the speaker, that Sloane leaned toward me. The scent of her perfume, a cloying blend of gardenia and something sharp and chemical, washed over me. Her lace-clad shoulder brushed mine. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, meant only for me, but pitched just loud enough for the guests on either side of us to catch the drift. "Go find another table, adopted girl?" The words didn't land like a blow. They slid into the air like a sliver of ice, precise and cold. They were designed not for a public scene, but for a quiet, personal assassination. The air in my lungs seemed to freeze. Around the table, I registered the subtle shifts. The woman to my left, a college friend of Sloane's, gave a choked little laugh and quickly disguised it as a cough. Carter's uncle, a man with a booming laugh and a face flushed with alcohol, let out a short, sharp snicker before his wife jabbed him with an elbow. Carter himself didn't react, his gaze fixed on the person making the toast, a mask of pleasant neutrality perfectly in place, but I saw the slight tightening at the corner of his jaw. He'd heard. He approved. The table I was being dismissed from was Table 1, the head table, the one Sloan had insisted I sponsor as a special family gift, $30,000. The wire transfer had cleared my personal account 10 weeks ago. It's to ensure a VIP spot for the family, Ava, she had explained over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It would mean so much to Mom and Dad, a real show of unity. I knew it was nonsense. The venue's packages were all-inclusive, but I'd agreed. I transferred the funds because it was easier than the argument, easier than the weeks of passive-aggressive comments and my mother's pained, pleading looks. I had paid for the privilege of sitting here, at this gleaming circle of mahogany, to be insulted with quiet, surgical precision. A few minutes later, the MC, a man with a voice as smooth and generic as hotel carpeting, took the microphone, and we'd like to give a very special thank you to the sponsors of our head tables tonight. A huge round of applause for Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Vale and the Bridgestone Group. The table erupted in polite applause. My name was not on the list. I looked at Sloan. She caught my eye and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. Oops, she mouthed silently, the knife-thin smile playing on her lips again. The performance was flawless. The public omission, a follow-up strike to the private whisper, confirmed the intent. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a coordinated attack. Something inside me didn't break. It clicked into place. The emotional response that she expected, the hurt, the anger, the public flush of humiliation, never came. Instead, my brain went into operations mode. I compartmentalized. I observed. I logged the data. Time of incident: 1942. Estás. Nature of breach: verbal insult. Public financial snub. Witnesses: 6, identified. Perpetrator: Sloan Mercer. Primary: accomplice: Carter Vale. Passive. I made a mental note of each person at the table, their reactions, their allegiances. In a boardroom, this is how you handle a hostile maneuver. You don't get angry. You get evidence. You don't raise your voice. You build your case. I took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue, a sharp, acidic taste. I swallowed the insult along with the wine, letting it settle into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The anger was there, but it wasn't a hot, messy fire. It was a block of dry ice, smokeless and frigid, burning with a quiet, focused intensity. I looked down at the table setting in front of me. The silverware was heavy. The napkin was linen. The plate was bone china with a delicate gold rim. Every detail was expensive. Every detail was a lie funded by my compliance, and as I was beginning to understand, by my company's resources. The waiter returned to clear away the salad plates. He moved with an efficiency I could appreciate. As he reached in front of me, the candlelight from the centerpiece glinted off the polished cufflink on his starched white shirt. His gloved hand, holding a stack of plates, was perfectly steady. The pure, unblemished white of the cotton glove seemed to absorb the golden light, a small, perfect detail in a sea of calculated artifice. And in that reflection, I saw it all with absolute clarity. The system was broken. The protocol had been violated. A foreign entity had infiltrated the network and was siphoning resources, my resources. Tonight was no longer just a wedding reception. It was a security audit, and I was about to pull the fire alarm, not with a loud clang, but with a single, silent keystroke. The pin on the grenade had been pulled by Sloane's own manicured hand. My job, now, was simply to let go. Across the conservatory, my mother, Helene, caught my eye. She offered a small, tight smile, a gesture of social spackling intended to smooth over any visible cracks in the family's facade. Helene operates on the principle that politeness is a universal solvent for all discord. She believes that if you simply ignore an injury with enough grace, it will heal itself. She doesn't understand that she's not applying a balm. She's just pressing a clean white bandage over a festering wound, trapping the poison inside. Beside her, my stepfather, Martin, beamed. He was adjusting the lapels of his tuxedo. A man perpetually posing for a photograph that existed only in his mind. Martin loves the idea of family, the Christmas cards, the formal portraits, the way we look sitting together at a ridiculously expensive wedding. He is a man who would always choose the glossy print over the messy negative, and he has spent 2 decades carefully curating our family album, cropping out anything that didn't fit his narrative of happy, seamless unity. He saw Sloane's wedding not as the union of 2 people, but as the premiere of his finest production yet. He, of course, hadn't heard Sloane's whisper, or if he had, he'd already filed it away as an unimportant bit of static, a flaw in the audio that would be edited out in post-production. This has always been the dynamic. Our family isn't a unit. It's a stage play, and we were all cast in our roles long ago. Sloane was born for the lead. She grew up in the spotlight, a whirlwind of ballet recitals, piano competitions, and lavish birthday parties. Her childhood was measured in applause and accolades. Mine was measured in responsibilities, while Sloane was practicing her curtain call. I was learning how to balance a checkbook for my mother's struggling floral shop. While she was fitted for costumes, I was given a set of office keys and a list of inventory to manage after school. It wasn't malicious neglect. It was a practical division of labor that hardened into a permanent state of being. Sloane was the art. I was the infrastructure. She was the one to be looked at, and I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on. The adopted line wasn't new. It was a vintage weapon, one she'd first unsheathed in the brutal social arena of high school. A rumor had started, as they do, a whisper in the hallways that I wasn't a real Mercer. I wasn't. My biological father had died when I was an infant, and Martin had adopted me when he married my mother. It was a simple fact, a line item in my personal history. But Sloane, with her innate talent for social warfare, understood its potential. When a friend, with the feigned innocence of a teenage girl, asked her if it was true, Sloane didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it, either. She just smiled that razor-thin smile and said, "We don't really talk about it. It's a sensitive subject for Ava." With that single, masterful stroke, she transformed a simple fact into a shameful secret, a source of intrigue and pity. She let the rumor live, nurturing it with her strategic silence, enjoying the subtle way it set me apart, marking me as other. That was the year I stopped trying to fight her battles on her terms. I couldn't compete with her brand of emotional theater, so I developed a different skill set. I learned to convert passive aggression into data points. The insults, the snubs, the casual cruelties, they stopped being personal attacks and became entries in a mental ledger. I started logging the details with the dispassionate focus of an auditor. I remembered the exact phrasing of a backhanded compliment, the date of a promise she never intended to keep, the names of the people who were in the room when she delivered a particularly cutting remark. It was a defense mechanism, a way of transforming pain into information. Information is power, and power, unlike feelings, cannot be easily dismissed. Over the years, that mental ledger grew, cross-referenced and annotated. It was a private, meticulous record of a debt that had been quietly accruing for 2 decades. Then, 2 years ago, Carter Vale entered the scene. He was perfect, as if he'd been designed in a lab to be Sloane's male counterpart. He had a portfolio of charming anecdotes, a wardrobe of impeccably tailored suits, and the predatory stillness of a leopard. His eyes, the color of old money, were like barcode scanners, constantly assessing, valuing, and cataloging everything and everyone they landed on. He looked at me, and I knew he wasn't seeing a sister-in-law. He was seeing an asset, or perhaps a liability. The first major transaction in my mental ledger involving Carter was logged at their engagement dinner. It was a cozy affair at my mother and Martin's house. Amid the clinking of wine glasses and the comfortable drone of family stories, Carter leaned toward me across the polished dining table. He had that same look of casual, disarming interest he probably used on potential investors. "Ava," he began, his voice smooth as scotch, "I'm so fascinated by what you do. Northbridge is a giant. You guys must have an ironclad process for vetting and approving new suppliers, right? I can't even imagine the complexity of the logistics." To everyone else, it was polite conversation, an admirable attempt by the future son-in-law to show interest in his new family's careers. My mother beamed at his conscientiousness. Martin nodded in approval, but I heard the subtext. He wasn't asking about my job. He was probing for weaknesses in the system. He was an explorer tapping the walls, searching for a hollow spot. I gave him the kind of smile I reserve for vendors who are trying to overcharge us. It was pleasant, professional, and revealed absolutely nothing. "We have robust, multi-layered protocols in place," I said. "The corporate jargon a deliberate wall. Security and compliance are our top priorities." The conversation moved on, but the data point had been logged. That night, long after the leftovers were put away and the house was quiet, I went home, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at my laptop. I logged into the Northbridge procurement system using my encrypted credentials. I didn't have any specific evidence yet, just a well-honed instinct that had saved the company millions over the years. I went into the administrative settings and created a new, custom alert flag, invisible to anyone but me and the head of internal audit. It was a silent tripwire. The trigger conditions were specific. Any new vendor categorized under logistics consulting or similar vague descriptors, invoicing under $10,000 to avoid automatic executive review, and linked to a non-corporate P&O box or a recently registered commercial address. I named the alert protocol Veil 1. It was a quiet, preventative measure, a digital fence I was building around my professional territory. For months, it lay dormant. Until 3 months ago, when an invoice from a company called Everly Finch Events triggered it. Now, sitting at her wedding, the whole performance clicked into focus. This perfect family was a shell corporation for dysfunction. Sloan was the CEO of her own drama. Martin was the head of marketing, selling a product that didn't exist, and my mother was the PR department, constantly issuing press releases about how everything was fine, and I, the operations manager, had finally discovered the embezzlement. Carter hadn't just married into the family, he had identified a potential new revenue stream. And Sloane's insult, her casual, cruel whisper of adopted girl, was not just a personal jab. It was the arrogance of a thief who thinks they've already gotten away with the crime. A final, dismissive flick to the person they've been stealing from all along. The smile I wore now, as I raised my glass to a toast for the happy couple, felt different. It wasn't a mask of tolerance anymore. It was the calm, placid expression of a system administrator who had just initiated a full security lockdown. The breach had been identified, the quarantine was in effect, the purge was about to begin. To understand the weapon Carter Vale and my sister chose, you first have to understand Northbridge dynamics. It is not simply a company. It is a circulatory system. We are a specialized medical logistics firm. The silent, invisible network that ensures a rare blood-clotting agent reaches a hemophiliac patient in rural Montana, or that a temperature-sensitive chemotherapy drug arrives at a Boston oncology clinic within its critical 4-hour viability window. We manage hundreds of millions of dollars in inventory and shipping contracts every month. Our operations are a vast, intricate web of shipping lanes, climate-controlled warehouses, and encrypted data streams. My job, as head of operations, is to be the guardian of that system. I ensure its integrity, I optimize its flow, and I hunt down and eliminate any inefficiency, any blockage, any threat. It is a job that requires a fundamental understanding that a single decimal point misplaced in a manifest or a 1-degree variance in a refrigeration unit is not a mistake. It is a potential catastrophe. 3 months before the wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon, my system flagged an anomaly. The Veil 1 protocol I had built years ago, the silent tripwire, was triggered for the first time. The notification that appeared on my secondary monitor was discreet, a simple amber alert box, a new vendor. Everly Finch Events had submitted its third invoice in 6 weeks. The invoices were for small, almost negligible amounts in the grand scheme of Northbridge's budget: $8,500, $6,200, $7,500. They were all just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger an automatic secondary review by the finance department, a classic tactic for staying under the radar. The description of services was deliberately, almost poetically, vague. Logistics consulting, route optimization analysis, supplier network review. These were services we either handled in-house with a team of PhDs or contracted out to major industry players for 7-figure sums, not to a no-name entity invoicing in the low 4 figures. It was the corporate equivalent of a single, anomalous cell appearing on a blood scan, insignificant on its own, but a potential harbinger of a much larger disease. My first step was to pull the vendor's onboarding file. The address listed for Everly Finch Events was not a corporate office or a business park. It was a commercial mail drop box at a strip mall in Pineford, a sleepy suburban town an hour away. Red flag number 2. A logistics consultant without a physical office is like a surgeon without a clinic. It suggests there is nothing real behind the nameplate. I then accessed the digital paperwork. The invoices had been submitted through our online portal, but the initial proof of service documentation required a signature from a Northbridge partner to authorize payment. The signature on the digital receiving documents, the confirmation that the consulting had been delivered, was crisp and clear. Carter Vale. His authorization was appended with the title, External Partner, Strategic Projects. This was the critical breach. Carter held no official position with Northbridge Dynamics. He was not an employee. He was not a registered contractor. Designating him as an external partner with signatory authority was a gross violation of our procurement protocol. It was a back door that had been deliberately unlocked and left ajar. I cross-referenced the employee ID of the junior procurement officer who had processed the initial vendor setup. It was a new hire, barely 4 months with the company. He had likely been charmed and manipulated by Carter. Fed a line about a special, high-level project that operated outside the usual channels. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place when I submitted a query to our accounts payable department. Citing a routine vendor data verification check, I requested the full banking details for Everly Finch Events. The account was with a major national bank. The routing number was standard, but the account number itself, the last 4 digits, were 70781. I paused. It felt familiar. I minimized the corporate finance window and pulled up my personal banking app. I scrolled back 3 months, to the gift I had given Sloan for her engagement. She'd sent me the account details for her dedicated wedding planning company, a little LLC she'd set up called Vale and Sloan Events. The account number for Vale and Sloan Events ended in 7781. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a signed, notarized confession. Everly Finch Events was a ghost, a shell corporation created for the sole purpose of billing Northbridge for phantom services, with the funds being funneled directly into an account to pay for my sister's wedding. Carter was using my company as his personal piggy bank. My response was not emotional, it was operational. I did not shut down the account. I did not confront the junior employee. I did not sound the alarm. A premature move would allow them to claim it was an accounting error, a simple mix-up of funds. They would apologize, pay the money back, and the underlying rot would remain. No, you don't treat a systemic infection with a single antibiotic pill. You let the infection spread just enough to map its full extent, to gather irrefutable proof, and then you administer the cure in one overwhelming, decisive dose. I opened a new, encrypted case file on my local server, naming it Project Nightingale. I initiated a silent audit. I flagged the Everly Finch account for monitoring, creating a rule to copy every piece of related correspondence, every invoice, and every payment confirmation into my secure file. I let the money flow, Each week, another invoice would arrive, always for a different, plausible-sounding service, always just under the $10,000 limit, and each week, I would watch the payment go through. And a few days later, I would see a corresponding charge on Sloane's public wedding registry or a gushing social media post about a new vendor she had just booked. $7,500 for routing maps from Everly Finch corresponded to the week she paid the deposit on the string quartet. $9,200 for carrier cost analysis coincided with the final payment for her couture wedding gown. It was a parallel ledger of theft and celebration. My plan crystallized. The wedding day would not be the culmination of their happiness. It would be the culmination of my data collection. It would be the final, inarguable data point in a chain of evidence, a public spectacle funded by a private crime. I let them build their beautiful, expensive stage, knowing that I was the one who controlled the lighting grid and the soundboard. 2 weeks before the wedding, with my file now containing a dozen fraudulent invoices and a clear, documented money trail, I acted. I scheduled a single, 30-minute meeting on the calendar for the Monday morning after the wedding. The invitees were an intentionally small and powerful group. Myself, Eleanor Vance, Northbridge's general counsel, and Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board. The subject line was intentionally anodyne. Q3 Vendor Protocol Review. I met with them privately beforehand, in Marcus's corner office on the 23rd floor, a sterile space of glass and steel overlooking the city. I didn't present a family problem. I presented a corporate security breach. I laid out the data points calmly and chronologically: the phantom vendor, the mail drop address, the compromised new hire, the improper signatory authority, the direct financial link to an external entity. I presented the flowchart I had made, showing the money leaving Northbridge's accounts and ending up, via the shell company, in the possession of Carter Vale and Sloane Mercer. I never once referred to Sloane as my sister. She was the secondary beneficiary. Marcus Thorne, a man who had built his empire on logistics and had zero tolerance for leaks in his ship, listened without interruption, his face impassive. Eleanor Vance, a lawyer who could find loopholes in a solid block of granite, reviewed the documents with a forensic intensity. When I finished, there was a long silence. Marcus looked out the window for a moment, then turned back to me. His eyes were cold as a winter sky. "What is the total amount currently misappropriated?" $97,400, sir, I replied, with one final invoice for the venue's balance likely to be submitted this week. "Let it be submitted," he said, his voice flat. "Let them complete the cycle. We will address this at our meeting on Monday at 0800 sharp. Thank you for your diligence. Ava, you've protected the company." Eleanor simply nodded, a thin, approving smile on her lips. "The chain of custody is clean. The evidence is airtight." I left the meeting knowing I had their full, unequivocal backing. My personal feelings were irrelevant to them, and I had made sure to present the case that way. This was not a story of a sibling's betrayal. It was a case of wire fraud, and it was about to be prosecuted, not in the messy court of family opinion, but in the cold, unforgiving theater of a corporate boardroom. The wedding was no longer just a party. It was the scene of the crime, and I was going to let them enjoy their last dance before I turned on all the lights. The main courses had been cleared away, leaving behind a battlefield of crumpled napkins and wine-stained tablecloths. The string quartet had been replaced by a DJ playing a tastefully curated set of soul classics, just loud enough to encourage conversation, but not so loud as to be intrusive. The lights in the Marigold Conservatory had been dimmed, transforming the glass cathedral into an intimate, glittering cavern. Laughter echoed. Champagne corks popped with soft, festive sighs. It was the perfect picture of celebration, a meticulously crafted moment of joy paid for by fraud. Weeks ago, during a planning call, I had made a simple offer. "Sloane, why don't I handle the photo slideshow? I can scan all the old family pictures, put them in chronological order, set it to music. It'll be my special contribution." It was the kind of task she always assigned me, the logistical, behind-the-scenes labor that required hours of work but yielded no public glory. "Oh, Ava, would you? She chirped, the relief in her voice palpable. That would be a lifesaver. I just don't have the time. Of course she didn't. She was too busy approving fraudulent invoices. She had emailed me a zip file of photos of herself and Carter, and I had dutifully spent a weekend at my high-end scanner, digitizing 2 decades of Mercer family history. Now, I walked to the small table near the DJ booth where the venue's AV equipment was set up. The projector, a sleek black rectangle, was already aimed at a large, retractable screen that hung invisibly against the far wall. I opened my laptop. The machine was a Northbridge Dynamics standard-issue model, a thin, powerful slab of brushed aluminum with military-grade encryption. On the clean desktop, there was a single folder labeled Memories. I opened it. Inside were 2 files. The first was a PowerPoint presentation titled Sloan and Carter, Our Story. Its icon a cheerful orange, it contained 150 photos of my sister growing from a gap-toothed child into the bride she was tonight. The second file was a password-protected PDF. Project Nightingale Summary, XX, PDF. It contained scans of every fraudulent invoice, a detailed flowchart of the money trail from Northbridge to Everly Finch to Vale and Sloan Events, LLC, and screenshots of Carter's digital signature on the receiving documents. The 2 files sat side by side, one a vessel of sentiment, the other a weapon of mass destruction. I connected my laptop to the projector with an HDMI cable. The screen flickered to life, mirroring my desktop for a brief moment before I switched it to the venue's logo. Everything was in place, as a matter of professional habit. I reached into my clutch and felt for the small, cold object tucked into an inner pocket. It was a verbatim flash drive, a tiny, unassuming thing containing a complete, encrypted copy of the Nightingale file. In operations, you always have a backup. You always have a contingency. With the technical setup complete, I walked toward the bar at the far end of the conservatory. The adrenaline I expected to feel was absent, replaced by a profound and chilling calm. I felt like I was overseeing the final stages of a complex product launch. All the variables had been accounted for. All the systems were green. Now, I was just waiting for the launch window. As the bartender handed me a glass of sparkling water, a familiar, cologne-scented presence materialized beside me. There you are. Carter's voice was smooth, but his smile was strained at the edges. He was holding a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid. You shouldn't scowl so much. Ava, it's a happy day. You'll get wrinkles. He delivered the line with a practiced charm, the kind of casual paternalism meant to put a woman in her place. I turned to face him, my expression neutral. I looked from his perfectly knotted tie to the expensive watch on his wrist, a timepiece I now knew had been partially funded by Northbridge's stolen assets. I took a small sip of my water, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Every day is a happy day, Carter, I replied, my voice even and low, as long as the books are clean. A flicker of something, confusion, annoyance, maybe even a sliver of fear, passed through his eyes before he masked it with a short laugh. He didn't understand the words, not yet, but he felt the shift in power. He felt the edge in my tone, as sharp and cold as the ice in his glass. He opened his mouth to say something else, but was interrupted by the rustle of lace. Sloan had appeared at his side, her arm looping through his. She had seen our exchange from across the room. There you are, she said, her voice bright and brittle. She shot me a look, a quick, dismissive appraisal. Ava, sweetie, I need to ask a tiny favor. We're moving you, just to that table over there. She gestured vaguely with her champagne flute toward a smaller, less prominent table near the service exit, a spot reserved for third-tier cousins and my mother's former assistant. Why? I asked, my voice flat. Oh, it's just for the photographer, she said, the lie slipping effortlessly from her lips. The angles are better for the wide shots of the head table without, we just need to balance the frame. She then leaned in, a mirror image of her earlier insult, and winked, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. Besides, it's a better view of the slideshow you made. Right, adopted? That was it. The final data point. The last line item in a long, exhaustive invoice of slights. It wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a confirmation. She saw me as temporary, disposable. A line item that could be moved or deleted to make the final picture look prettier. I gave her nothing. No anger, no hurt. I simply nodded once, a gesture of cold, final acknowledgement. Of course, I said. Anything to balance the frame. I picked up my water and walked to my new, downgraded seat. As I sat down, I placed my clutch on the table, pulled out my phone, and opened a secure messaging app. The contact was E. Vance, Eleanor's private number. I typed 2 words, my thumb moving with a steady, practiced precision. Playlist ready. I hit send. The message was delivered instantly. This was our prearranged signal. It wasn't just a text message. It was a corporate command. It initiated a protocol we had established 2 weeks ago. Upon receiving this message, Eleanor would immediately forward the entire Project Nightingale file to the other board members, the Chief of Internal Audit, and the bank's fraud division. She would place a call to the event security lead I had hired independently, a discreet 2-man team currently posing as guests, and put them on standby. She would trigger an automatic freeze on all outgoing payments from the Northbridge accounts associated with the shell company. The wheels of corporate justice were now, at this very moment, beginning to turn, silent and inexorable. I looked at my hand resting on the cool linen of the tablecloth. It was perfectly still. There was no tremor, no sweat. I was not a woman acting out of rage. I was an operator executing a plan. I had spent 60 days preparing for the next 2 minutes of my life, 60 days of gathering evidence, building my case, and controlling my emotions, compressing them into a single, dense point of energy. Sloan and Carter thought this was their night, their stage. They had no idea that they were merely actors in a play I had written, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act. The DJ lowered the music, and a warm spotlight found the MC. All right, everyone, let's keep the love going. At this time, we'd like to invite the bride's wonderful sister, Ava Mercer, to the stage for a toast. A smattering of polite applause broke out. From a table of Carter's college friends, a slightly drunken, good-natured wolf whistle cut through the air. I pushed my chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the polished concrete floor seeming unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. I felt the eyes of the room on me as I walked from my satellite table toward the small, elevated stage. Each step was measured, deliberate. The click of my heels on the floor was a metronome, counting down the final seconds of their charade. I passed my family's table. My mother, Helene, gave me a look of pure, unadulterated relief, a desperate little smile that pleaded, "Be nice, be normal, keep the peace." Martin gave me a proud thumbs up, seeing only his daughter taking her rightful place in the family tableau. And Sloan looked at me with an expression of smug triumph, a queen watching a loyal, if slightly inconvenient, subject come to pay tribute. She thought my move to the back table was a sign of my surrender. She had no idea it was my final move into an offensive position. I took the microphone from the MC. It was heavy, solid, cool to the touch. I gripped it firmly. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was clear and steady, amplified by the speakers, filling every corner of the vast, glass-walled room. "I won't keep you long." I turned my smile first to the head table. "Sloan, Carter, the word radiant doesn't do you justice tonight. Sloan and Carter, well, you certainly are a man who gets what he wants. On behalf of our entire family, I wish you both a lifetime of happiness that is as rich and as well-deserved as you are." The crowd chuckled at the mild joke. It was the perfect opening, generic, warm, completely expected. "A wedding like this," I continued, gesturing to the opulent surroundings, "doesn't just happen. It takes a village. It takes planning, precision, and a team of incredible vendors working seamlessly behind the scenes. And as someone who spends her life in the world of operations and logistics, I have to say, I am deeply, deeply impressed." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. I saw Carter preen slightly, accepting the compliment on his wife's behalf. In particular, I said, my eyes locking onto his, I want to give a special shout-out to one of your key suppliers, a company I've had the pleasure of interacting with through my own work. Their execution has been truly flawless. So, a big round of applause for Everly Finch Events, please. The name landed in the room with a soft thud. The guests applauded politely, obligingly. They didn't know the name. Why would they? But Carter's smile froze on his face. It didn't fall. It just hardened, like wax cooling. Sloane's brow furrowed in a flicker of confusion. Everly who? To celebrate their journey, I announced, turning toward the large screen behind me. I've put together a few memories. I clicked the wireless mouse in my hand. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was Sloane, aged 5, in a pink tutu and a tiara, grinning a gap-toothed grin. A collective "oh" rippled through the audience. The next photo showed her on a swing, pigtails flying, then a high school graduation photo. Beaming in a cap and gown, the images flowed, a curated river of happy memories. Each one met with soft laughter and appreciative murmurs. The music from the DJ was a gentle, instrumental track, underscoring the nostalgia. The room was warm, sentimental, completely disarmed. The final photo in the sequence was of Sloane at her bridal shower. Just a few months ago, laughing as she opened a gift, I let it linger on the screen. Then, I clicked again. The photo of Sloane didn't cut to black. It began a slow, deliberate crossfade. As her laughing face dissolved, another image resolved into view. It was not a photograph. It was a document. Stark, black and white. At the top, in a crisp, corporate font, was the Northbridge Dynamics logo. The room fell silent. The soft laughter died in people's throats. The gentle music from the DJ booth suddenly seemed intrusive, and after a moment, he faded it out completely. The only sound was the low hum of the projector. On the screen, magnified to 6 feet high, was an invoice. The vendor name was clearly visible. Everly Finch Events. The invoice number was 4712. The description of services read, Consulting Routing Maps, and the amount due, at the bottom right, was $7,500. A wave of confused whispering started to spread through the room like a crack appearing in ice. People were leaning toward each other, their faces baffled. What was this? Some kind of bizarre, corporate in-joke? Before the confusion could fully set in, I clicked the mouse again. The screen split. On the left, invoice 4712 remained. On the right, another document appeared. This one was from the wedding venue's preferred florist. It was an invoice addressed to Vale and Sloane Events, LLC. The line item was Guest Table Centerpieces. The date was identical to the Northbridge invoice. The amount was $7,500. The whispering stopped. The silence that replaced it was heavy, absolute. Carter was no longer smiling. He was rigid, a statue carved from ice, his hand gripping his champagne flute so tightly that I could see his knuckles were bone white. Sloane's face had gone slack with a horror that was just beginning to dawn. She was staring at the screen, then at Carter, her mouth slightly agape. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice, in the profound silence, was like a scalpel. It's truly beautiful, I said softly. When the numbers line up so perfectly, almost like a fairy tale. I gave the room a moment to absorb the implication, to connect the dots, to understand that the flowers on their tables were paid for by a phantom consulting fee billed to my company. Click. The screen changed again. The invoices disappeared, replaced by something even simpler and far more damning. It was a flowchart. On the far left, the Northbridge Dynamics logo. An arrow pointed from it to a box in the middle labeled Everly Finch Events, Vendor P.O. Box, Pineford. Another arrow led from that box to the final box on the right, labeled Vale and Sloane Events, LLC, wedding account ending in 7781. Below the final arrow, in bold red text, was the running total of the funds transferred over the past 3 months, $106,900. This, There was no misunderstanding. It was the anatomy of a crime, displayed for 200 guests. My mother's face was ashen. Martin looked utterly, completely lost, his brain unable to process the data that was destroying his perfect family photograph. I let the image burn into the room for a full 10 seconds. I saw the flash of a few cell phone cameras. The evidence was now being documented by the witnesses. Finally, I raised my own glass of water from the podium. My hand was as steady as a surgeon's. I smiled, a genuine, serene smile that didn't touch my eyes. "So I'd like to propose a toast," I said, my voice ringing with a terrible, final clarity. I raised the glass higher, looking directly at Sloane and Carter. "To love, transparency," I paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And refunds." I took a single, deliberate sip of water and placed the glass down on the podium with a soft, definitive click. The flowchart of their fraud remained on the screen behind me, a silent, glowing testament to their greed, illuminating the wreckage of their perfect day. The flowchart of their fraud hung on the screen in the silent hall like a piece of abstract, brutalist art. For a full 15 seconds, no one moved. The world seemed to have frozen in the projector's beam. Then, the spell broke. A chair scraped. Someone gasped. From the head table, a blur of white lace and fury erupted. Sloane. Before anyone could react, she was off the dais and storming toward me. Her face was a mask of incandescent rage. The carefully constructed bridal beauty contorted into something ugly and raw. She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene in front of the 200 stunned witnesses. Her sense of stagecraft was too ingrained for that. Instead, she grabbed my arm just above the elbow, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin like talons. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You and me. Now," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. She yanked me off the stage and pulled me toward a side door marked, "Staff Only." Carter was right behind us, his face pale and slick with a thin sheen of sweat. He was trying to project an aura of control, but the panic in his eyes was a wildfire. We burst through the door into the harsh, fluorescent reality of the conservatory's backstage area. The transition was jarring. We went from the warm, golden glow of a fairy tale to the cold, blue-white light of a warehouse. The air here smelled of bleach and wilting flowers. Stacks of unused linens were piled on metal shelves next to boxes of industrial-sized dish soap. The muffled sound of the bewildered guests was a distant hum, the sound of a world we had just violently exited. Sloane spun me around to face her, finally releasing my arm. "What the hell are you doing?" she shrieked, the whisper gone, replaced by a raw, ragged fury. "Are you insane? This is my wedding, my one day." "You're right," I said, my voice unnervingly calm in the echoing, sterile space. "It is your wedding, and you've paid for it. The question is, with whose money?" Carter stepped forward, placing himself between us, a feeble attempt to reassert his authority. "This is slander. Ava, a completely baseless, vindictive attack. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer." I almost smiled. The threat was so predictable, so hollow. Instead of answering him, I reached into the clutch purse that was still slung over my shoulder. I pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it and held it out. "Baseless?" I asked. I offered the paper to Sloane, but it was Carter who snatched it. It was a hard copy of the initial service agreement between Northbridge Dynamics and the Ghost Company, Everly Finch Events. It outlined the scope of the so-called consulting work, and at the bottom, on the signature line next to the title, External Partner, Strategic Projects, was Carter's own arrogant, looping signature. I had printed it this morning on official Northbridge letterhead. It was a prop, but a powerful one. "He used my company." "Sloane," I said, my eyes fixed on my sister. "He used my position, my reputation, to create a fake vendor and funnel over $100,000 of corporate funds into your wedding account. Whether you knew the specifics or not, you spent the money. You are the beneficiary of a crime." "You have no right," Carter started, his voice a low growl, crumpling the paper in his fist. I have every right, I cut him off, my voice dropping, losing any trace of warmth and becoming the flat, authoritative voice I used in board meetings. That money doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the shareholders of Northbridge Dynamics. It is a fiduciary responsibility. Carter, a concept you, as a financial consultant, should understand. I let that sink in. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. This was no longer a family drama. I had just redefined the battlefield. And just so we're clear on the operational status of this situation, I continued, my full report, including every invoice, every bank transfer, and a sworn statement from the procurement officer you manipulated, was delivered to our general counsel, our entire board of directors, and the fraud division of our corporate bank exactly 7 minutes ago. The process has been initiated. It is no longer in my hands. Sloane stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The rage in her eyes was being eclipsed by the dawning, chilling light of comprehension. The word fraud had finally registered. The mention of banks and lawyers, not his lawyer but a corporate legal team, had changed the very texture of her reality. I reached into my clutch again. This time, I pulled out a different document. It was a copy of the bank statement for the Vale and Sloan Events LLC account, a single page, showing the influx of 6 large deposits from Everly Finch Events. In the top right corner, I had, this afternoon, used a notary public to stamp and sign it, attesting that it was a true and accurate copy of the document provided in my audit. The official, embossed seal and the crisp blue ink of the signature gave it an undeniable weight of authority. I held it out to her. This time, she took it. Her hands were trembling slightly. She looked down at the page, her eyes scanning the columns of dates and figures. She saw the name of the shell company. She saw the deposits that matched the dates she'd paid the caterer, the photographer, the venue. She saw the official, stamped seal. This wasn't an accusation anymore. This was paperwork. This was proof. The fight seemed to drain out of her. Her body slumping as if her bones had suddenly gone soft. The bravado, the anger, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pale, terrified woman in a ridiculously expensive dress. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I looked from her shattered expression to Carter's panicked, cornered animal glare, and I allowed myself this one, single moment of retribution, the final entry in the ledger. The adopted girl comment, Sloane, I said, my voice quiet, almost conversational. That was free. It didn't cost you a cent, but it bought you this moment, right here. It was the final authorization I needed to approve this transaction. From the doorway behind us, a new figure appeared. It was the venue manager, a tall woman named Claire with a perpetually worried expression and a clipboard permanently attached to her hand. She was looking at Carter, her professional smile strained. "Mr. Vale?" she said, her voice apologetic but firm. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. We seem to have an issue. The final payment for the venue, the one scheduled for automatic transfer this evening. Our system is showing the transaction was declined." Carter's head whipped around. "What? That's impossible. Run it again." "We have, sir," she said, her expression hardening slightly. 3 times. The notification we received from the issuing bank cites a pending fraud investigation and has placed a temporary hold on all outgoing funds from the source account. I'm afraid until this is cleared up, we'll have to suspend bar service and instruct the kitchen to hold off on the cake. Claire looked from Carter's ashen face to Sloane's stricken one, then glanced at me, standing calm and composed amidst the wreckage. She took in the scene, the crumpled contract in Carter's fist, the bank statement in Sloane's trembling hand. She and her staff, standing by the door, were now not just witnesses, they were collateral damage, the first civilian casualties of the war I had just officially declared, and they understood, with the immediate, pragmatic clarity of service industry professionals, that they were probably not going to get paid tonight. At Aero 8 Huntois on Monday morning, The boardroom on the 23rd floor of the Northbridge Dynamics headquarters was silent. It was a room designed to project power, a minimalist theater of corporate governance. A single, massive slab of polished granite formed the table, reflecting the cool gray light of the city skyline filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive coffee. This was not a room for family drama. It was a room for clinical high-stakes decisions. It was my arena. I was already seated at the table, my laptop open, a single file displayed on the screen. To my right sat Eleanor Vance, our general counsel, her silver pen resting perfectly parallel to a leather-bound legal pad. Across from her was Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board, a man whose stillness was more intimidating than any display of anger. He was staring out at the city, his hands steepled in front of him, a picture of absolute, patient authority. At the far end of the table was David Chen, our head of internal audit, a man who lived and breathed spreadsheets and saw the world as a series of accounts to be balanced. We were the system, assembled and waiting. At 00802, the heavy glass door hissed open. Carter and Sloane entered. They did not look like the radiant couple from the wedding. Carter's expensive suit seemed to hang on him. His face was pale and unshaven, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive posture. Sloane was a ghost of her bridal self. She wore a simple black dress, her face devoid of makeup, her eyes wide and terrified. She clung to the arm of a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a rumpled suit who could only be the family lawyer she'd managed to find on a Sunday. They were a delegation from a defeated nation, come to surrender. No one offered them coffee, no one greeted them. They took the seats indicated by Eleanor's brief, dismissive gesture. The lawyer began to shuffle papers, a nervous, rustling sound that seemed an affront to the room's profound silence. Marcus Thorne did not turn from the window. "Mr. Vale," he began, his voice calm and resonant, "you were summoned here to respond to a series of unauthorized financial transactions originating from this company. Ms. Mercer, you are here as the primary beneficiary of those transactions. We will be efficient. Ava, the floor is yours." I swiveled my laptop so the large monitor at the head of the table mirrored my screen. The first slide appeared, the Northbridge Dynamics logo. "On Saturday evening," I began, my voice even and devoid of emotion, "I presented a brief summary of a significant security breach. This morning, I will walk you through the full audit trail. Project Nightingale was initiated 3 months ago following the detection of a new vendor, Everly Finch Events, which was flagged by our system for multiple irregularities." I clicked to the next slide. It was a clean corporate table listing the data points. First, the vendor's registered address was confirmed as a commercial mail drop box in Pineford, with no physical office or corporate footprint. Second, the vendor was onboarded by a junior procurement officer, now on administrative leave, who has provided a sworn statement that he was instructed to bypass standard verification protocols by an individual representing himself as an external strategic partner. I glanced at Carter. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle was twitching in his cheek. "Third," I continued, "the signatory authority on all proof-of-service documents was found to be Mr. Carter Vale, who holds no official contract or position with Northbridge Dynamics. This represents a fundamental breach of our procurement security." I clicked again. A system log appeared on the screen, a cascade of time-stamped code. Here we have the system access logs. They show the junior officer granting Mr. Vale temporary portal access from an IP address that geolocates to a coffee shop 2 blocks from Mr. Vale's former apartment. He was, quite literally, inside our system. Sloane's lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne? Ms. Vance? My client, Ms. Mercer, had absolutely no knowledge of these corporate particulars. She is a wedding planner, not a logistics expert. The source of the funds was a matter handled entirely by her fiancé. Your client's ignorance of the law is not a defense, counsel," Eleanor Vance interjected without looking at him, her voice like chipping ice. It merely speaks to her choice in partners. Please allow Ms. Mercer to finish." The lawyer fell silent, a flush creeping up his neck. "The most compelling evidence of intent," I said, moving to the next part of my presentation, "is not merely in the invoices, but in the premeditation." I clicked a button, and the speakers in the room came to life. The sound was a crystal-clear audio recording of a phone call. "And so I was just wondering," Carter's smooth, confident voice filled the room, "what's the typical threshold for, a secondary sign-off on a new vendor payment? Is it 10 grand? 15? A younger, hesitant voice replied, Usually anything over $10,000 requires a signature from a department head, sir." Got it. Makes sense," Carter's voice continued, oozing charm. "Just trying to understand the process so I don't step on any toes. You've been a huge help. Mark?" I stopped the recording. That was a call made by Mr. Vale 1 month ago to the same junior procurement officer. The call was automatically recorded as per company policy for all incoming calls to that department. Mr. Vale was actively probing our system for its financial thresholds, for the express purpose of structuring his fraudulent invoices to remain just below the level of executive scrutiny. This is not an oversight. This is a meticulously planned operation. Carter finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "That call is taken out of context. I was doing due diligence for a potential future partnership. This is a simple accounting mix-up. Wires get crossed. It's a clerical error." "A clerical error that occurred 12 times in perfect sync with your wedding payment schedule?" David Chen, the auditor, spoke for the first time, his voice dry as dust. He didn't look up from his tablet. "The statistical probability of that is negligible." My next slide showed 2 columns. On the left, a list of the 12 payments made from Northbridge to Everly Finch. On the right, a list of major payments made from the Vale and Sloan events account to wedding vendors. The dates were perfectly aligned. The amounts were often identical down to the dollar. It was quid pro quo, laid bare in the sterile language of a balance sheet. A $10,000 payment for warehouse efficiency consulting was made on August 12th. I narrated, my voice flat. On August 13th, a $10,000 deposit was paid to the Marigold Conservatory. A $7,500 payment for routing maps was made on September 2nd. On September 3rd, the florist was paid $7,500, and so on, for a total of $106,900. Sloane's lawyer tried again, his voice strained. "My client was under the impression that Mr. Vale had secured private investment for their wedding planning business. She had no reason to believe the capital was from an improper source. She had a reason to believe it when she was standing backstage at her wedding on Saturday night, and I presented her with a bank statement," I countered, my eyes locking on Sloane. "She knew then. She knew when the venue manager announced that the final payment had been declined because the source account was frozen pending a fraud investigation." Sloane flinched as if I'd struck her. She wouldn't meet my gaze. I clicked to my final slide. It contained no images, no graphs, just a few simple, bulleted lines of text under the Northbridge logo. "The company's position is not a negotiation," I stated. My presentation concluded. I was no longer an analyst. I was speaking for the corporation. Northbridge Dynamics demands the following. 1. Full and immediate restitution of the $106,900. 2. Assigned admission of liability from Mr. Vale and a permanent injunction barring him from any future contact or business with this company or any of its subsidiaries. And 3. I paused. As this constitutes a clear case of wire fraud, the company has a legal and ethical obligation to turn the full contents of Project Nightingale, including the audio recording and all financial records, over to the district attorney's office. That transfer is pending the outcome of this meeting." The room was utterly silent. Carter's face was a mask of disbelief. He had walked in here thinking he could bluff his way out of a family argument. He had not understood that he was a bug under the microscope of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Sloane's lawyer looked at Carter, then at Sloane, then back at Marcus Thorne, his face a portrait of defeat. He had come to mediate a domestic dispute and had walked into a federal crime. He had no moves left. Marcus Thorne finally turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over Carter and Sloane with an expression of profound disinterest, as if looking at a line of code that had produced an error. He looked at me, then at Eleanor. He had heard everything he needed to hear. He steepled his fingers once more. His final judgment was delivered in 2 words, as quiet and as final as a vault door swinging shut. So moved. The 2 words from Marcus Thorne hung in the chilled air. Less a verdict and more a system command being executed. The effect was immediate. Eleanor Vance gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to someone outside the glass walls of the boardroom. The door hissed open again, but this time it wasn't a lawyer who entered. It was 2 men, both tall, both dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits that failed to conceal their broad shoulders and the coiled stillness of professional security. They didn't look at anyone but Carter. There was no discussion, no force was used. One of the men simply said, his voice a low, polite baritone, "Mr. Vale, if you'll come with us, please." It was not a request. Carter looked wildly from Marcus to Eleanor, then to me, searching for an appeal, an ally, any sign that this was still a negotiation. He found nothing but cold, implacable surfaces. His lawyer, looking utterly defeated, placed a hand on his arm and muttered something. Carter seemed to deflate, the last of his fight draining out of him. He stood up, his chair making a loud, grating noise against the stone floor. The 2 men flanked him. They didn't touch him, but their presence was a physical boundary, guiding him toward the door. As they left, I saw Sloane flinch, a small, involuntary movement, as if a thread connecting them had just been violently snipped. We all watched on the large monitor, which Eleanor had silently switched from my presentation to a live feed from the security camera in the elevator lobby. The image was silent, grainy, rendered in shades of gray. We saw the trio, Carter and his 2 shadows, walk toward the brushed steel elevator doors. Carter, in a last, desperate act of defiance or perhaps just muscle memory, reached into his wallet and pulled out a Northbridge Dynamics guest pass. He must have been issued at the security desk downstairs. He swiped it at the panel. We saw the small indicator light on the panel flash red. Once, twice, the elevator doors remained shut. One of his escorts reached past him with his own card. The light flashed green, and the doors slid open with a silent, final whoosh. Carter stepped inside. The doors slid shut, and his image was gone. He had been surgically excised from the building. As the elevator doors closed on the screen, a discreet notification pinged on the tablet belonging to David Chen, the auditor. He glanced at it, then looked at me and gave a single, curt nod. He didn't need to speak. I knew what it meant. The temporary restraining order on the Vale and Sloane Events LLC account had been executed by the bank. The wire transfer protocol had been reversed. The stolen money, all $106,900 of it, was at that very moment flowing backward through the digital arteries of the financial system, leaving Sloane's wedding account and returning to its rightful place in the Northbridge treasury. The books were being balanced. Eleanor Vance, meanwhile, had slid a single, crisp document across the granite table toward Sloane and her lawyer. It wasn't a threat. It was a notification, a formal letter of intent. "For your records, Counselor," Eleanor said, her voice dry. "That is a notice that Northbridge Dynamics is filing a civil suit against your client for fraudulent enrichment and damages. As she is the direct beneficiary of the misappropriated funds, we must, for the sake of our shareholders, take action to claw back any and all assets acquired through those funds. That will include, but is not limited to, all non-refundable deposits made to wedding vendors." The lawyer picked up the paper as if it were radioactive. Sloane stared at it, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. It was one thing to see her new husband disgraced and dismissed. It was another to understand that the legal and financial consequences were now coming for her. The dress she was wearing, the ring on her finger, the memories of a party that had ended in disaster, All of it was now evidence in a lawsuit. She was no longer just a bride. She was a defendant. The meeting was over. Marcus Thorne stood up, a clear signal of dismissal. Eleanor, David, see to the legal and financial filings. Ava, my thanks again for your diligence. He walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance. Sloane and her lawyer remained seated, frozen in a bubble of shock and impending legal doom. I closed my laptop, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. I slipped it into its leather sleeve. Then, I stood up and walked around the table toward my sister. She looked up at me as I approached, her face a pale, blank canvas. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All the roles she had ever played, the popular girl, the beloved daughter, the radiant bride, had been stripped away. She was just Sloane, exposed and defenseless. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was unmarked. I placed it on the table in front of her. It landed with a soft, final thud. She stared at it, uncomprehending. What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A wedding gift," I said, my voice neutral. "A bit belated." Her brow furrowed. With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope and opened it. She pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was the invoice from the Marigold Conservatory for the sponsorship of Table 1. The original amount, $30,000, was clearly visible, but at the top, the billing name had been officially changed. It no longer read Ava Mercer. It now read Sloane Mercer Vale. I had called the venue's accounting department first thing this morning and had them make the change. She looked from the invoice to my face, her eyes searching for something. Triumph, anger, pity. She found nothing but a calm, settled emptiness. "Now it's well and truly your table," I said. She opened her mouth. I saw the muscles in her jaw work as she searched for a response, for a script, for a line that would work in this scene. But there was none. No witty comeback, no tearful apology, no furious denial. The playbook she had used her entire life was useless here. For the first time, she had no lines. She closed her mouth. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. My heels clicked against the polished granite floor of the boardroom, the sound sharp and rhythmic. Each footstep was a punctuation mark, a period, a final closing of a file. The heavy glass door hissed open before me and then hissed shut behind me, sealing them in the silent, sterile room with the consequences of their actions. Out in the elevator lobby, no one spoke to me, no one congratulated me, no one clapped. I didn't need them to. The system was balanced. The operation was complete. That was my reward. The aftermath was not a dramatic explosion, but a series of quiet, efficient, mechanical adjustments. The system, having identified and expelled a foreign body, began the process of healing and hardening its defenses. There was no fanfare, no victory lap. There was only the hum of the machine returning to its optimal state. By 11 o'clock a.m. on Monday, an internal communiqué was distributed to all Northbridge Dynamics employees. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-disclosure, drafted by Eleanor Vance herself. Subject: Reaffirmation of Vendor Procurement Protocols. To all Northbridge personnel, this memorandum serves as a reaffirmation of our company's stringent protocols regarding the onboarding and payment of all external vendors. We remind all department heads to ensure full compliance with multi-factor verification for any new supplier contracts. In light of a recent internal review, we will be implementing enhanced security measures within the accounts payable portal over the next quarter. Northbridge Dynamics extends its gratitude to the operations team for their diligence in identifying a recent procedural anomaly. Their swift action has prevented potential downstream financial impacts and has reinforced the integrity of our network. Thank you for your continued commitment to the security and efficiency of our operations. My name was not mentioned. Carter's was not mentioned. The word fraud was absent. It was perfect. I was not a hero. I was simply part of a high-functioning team. The memo was not a celebration. It was a system update, a patch installed to fix a vulnerability. The ripples continued to spread through the corporate structure. An email from Human Resources to all division managers was sent out at 2:00 p.m. It was a direct order, stemming from a resolution passed by the board in the hour following our meeting. The directive was simple and sweeping. A full-scale audit of all vendors designated as external partners or strategic consultants was to be completed within 90 days. Any partner without a master service agreement co-signed by General Counsel was to have their access and payment privileges suspended immediately. Pending review, the loophole Carter had exploited was being sealed shut, not with putty, but with welded steel. The legal department moved with the silent, deadly speed of a shark. At 3:15 p.m., a certified letter of demand was sent via courier to the Strip Mall P.O. box in Pineford that served as the sole address for Everly Finch events. It was a legal formality, a ghost ship sending a final, useless message to another ghost. The letter would sit in the locked metal box for 30 days before being returned to sender. The PEO box itself, its rental fees having been paid from the now frozen account, would be closed by the end of the week. The corporate entity known as Everly Finch Events was already in the process of being erased from existence. While the corporate world realigned itself with cold precision, the world of my family simply went dark. The Mercer family group chat, a once constant stream of exclamation points, emojis, and passive-aggressive compliments from my mother, fell utterly silent. For 2 full days, there was nothing, no frantic questions from Martin, no accusations, no demands for an explanation. The silence was a confession in itself, an admission that there was nothing to be said, no narrative that could be spun to fix what had been so publicly and irrevocably broken. Then, on Wednesday morning, a single notification appeared. It was from my mother, Helene. It was not a text. It was not a missed call. It was a single emoji, a wilting rose. The symbol was so perfectly her, ambiguous, laced with passive sorrow, a gesture of mourning for the beautiful picture that had been shattered, without ever acknowledging the lie at its core. It was not an apology, it was a lament. I looked at it for a moment, registered the data, and did not reply. On the internet, the digital ghost of the wedding was being systematically exorcised. Sloane's Instagram, once a vibrant monument to her perfect life, had been locked down. Her profile was now private. The dozens of photos from the wedding, tagged with veil to be, had vanished. The one remaining post, a gushing tribute to her incredible vendors and generous sponsors, had its comments disabled. Sometime on Tuesday, that post, too, was quietly deleted. The online fairy tale had been erased. The server records wiped clean of a story that no longer had a happy ending. I threw nothing away, and I kept almost nothing. The files for Project Nightingale were archived on the secure Northbridge servers, now the property of the legal department. The clothes I wore to the wedding were sent to the dry cleaner and returned to my closet. The event was over. The job was done. There was no need for souvenirs. Except for one. I kept the place card from the head table, the one that Sloane's wedding planner had printed for me. A thick piece of ivory cardstock, the name elegantly scripted in gold calligraphy. Miss A. Mercer, not my full name, an initial, a placeholder, a subtle but intentional misprint that designated me as an auxiliary, an attachment, not a core member. It was the physical manifestation of Sloane's final whisper, adopted girl. I didn't frame it. I didn't put it on a mantelpiece. On Friday, after the work week was done, I went to my office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one reserved for my most sensitive closed-case files. I pulled out a single, thick manila folder. On the tab, I wrote in clean, black ink, Project Nightingale, closed. Inside, I placed the printed summary of my audit, a copy of the board's resolution, and the final confirmation from the bank that the funds had been fully recovered. Then I took the small, ivory place card. I didn't look at it with triumph, or anger, or even satisfaction. I looked at it the way an auditor looks at the final, confirming receipt in a long and complex investigation. It was the catalyst, the inciting incident, the final piece of data that had moved the entire project from monitoring to active execution. I clipped it neatly to the inside cover of the file. On the very last page, a final, quiet artifact cataloged and stored. There would be no late-night phone calls promising to change, no tearful Thanksgiving dinners where we all agreed to let bygones be bygones. There would be no sequel. A system, once breached and then fortified, does not simply return to its previous state of vulnerability, it evolves. The stage where we had performed our family roles for 2 decades had been condemned. There was no longer a script for a heartfelt apology from Sloane, because I was no longer in the audience, waiting to receive it. The debt had not been forgiven. It had been paid in full. The account was closed. A week later, the city was just a city again. The sky was a hazy, industrial blue, and the late afternoon sun cast long, tired shadows between the buildings. I didn't go straight home from the office. Instead, I walked, my heels making a steady, rhythmic click on the pavement, a sound that belonged only to me. My steps led me, without a conscious plan, to the old part of town, to a quiet street that ran alongside the Beckett River. There was a restaurant there I'd always liked, a place called The Anchor, with dark wood, low lighting, and windows that looked out over the slow gray-green water. It was the quiet hour, that peaceful lull between the late lunch crowd and the first dinner reservations. The hostess, a young woman with a kind, weary smile, greeted me at the door. "Hi there, welcome. Table for how many?" "Just one, please," I said. The words felt simple, clean. She led me not to a small, awkward table tucked away by the kitchen, but to a comfortable booth by a large window. It was a good table, a table for a valued customer, not an afterthought. As I slid onto the cool leather of the seat, she asked again, a hint of politeness in her voice. "So, you're sure? Just for one?" I looked at the empty seat across from me, then out the window at the river, where a single barge was making its slow, determined way downstream. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that started from somewhere deep and unfamiliar. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and certain. "Just me? It's perfect." She left the menu and I was alone, enveloped by the low hum of the restaurant and the fading light. I didn't open the menu. I knew what I wanted. For a few minutes, I just watched the water, feeling the tightly coiled spring in my chest, a tension I had carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there, finally begin to unspool. This quiet, this solitude, was not the loneliness of the excluded child at the family dinner. It was the deliberate, chosen peace of a sovereign state. I pulled my phone from my clutch, not from the addict's twitch for distraction, but with the specific, focused intent of an operator checking a final status report. I bypassed the texts and the social media notifications. I opened my corporate email. There was only one new message in my priority inbox, received 2 days ago, that I had saved to read until this moment. The sender was Marcus Thorne. The subject line was 6 simple words. "Thank you for keeping the lights on." I read the words again. It wasn't praise. It wasn't an emotional attaboy. It was an acknowledgement of a fundamental fact, a recognition from one operator to another. It was the highest form of compliment he could give. He saw me not as a woman, not as a sister, not as a victim, but as a competent steward of the system. He understood that my actions had not been about passion or revenge, but about functionality, about ensuring the vast, complex machine of Northbridge dynamics continued to run without interference, without being compromised by parasites. It was a quiet, profound validation that settled over me like a weighted blanket, a sense of professional closure so complete it was almost peaceful. As I was about to lock the screen, it lit up with a new notification. It was a text message. The banner at the top of the screen showed my sister's name, a name that now looked foreign, like a word from a language I no longer spoke. Beneath it, the 3 small dots of the typing indicator pulsed, a frantic, digital heartbeat. Sloane is typing. I watched the dots for a long moment, my face reflected in the dark screen. I could almost feel the frantic energy on the other end of the line, the desperate search for the right words, the right combination of apology and excuse that might begin to repair the irreparable. The message, when it came, would be a performance. It would be a carefully crafted plea for her own absolution, not for my healing. It would be about her wanting to feel like a good person again, not about the years of being made to feel like a lesser one. It was an incoming data packet from a corrupted server, an attempt by a compromised system to reconnect to the network. And I, the network administrator, had the absolute authority to deny the request. My thumb moved with a calm, deliberate slowness. It did not tap the notification to open it. It did not swipe to dismiss it. I simply pressed the power button on the side of the phone, and the screen went black. Then, with a quiet, final gesture, I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the table. The conversation, whatever it might have been, was over before it began. The waiter arrived, a quiet man with kind eyes, and I ordered a glass of scotch and a steak, medium rare. When he left, my hand brushed against my clutch. I opened it and took out the one souvenir I had kept from the wreckage, the small, ivory place card. Miss A. Mercer. I placed it on the table beside my water glass. In the dim, warm light of the restaurant, it looked less like an insult and more like a relic, an artifact from a dead civilization. The sharp, clean edge of the cardstock was like the spine of a knife that has been polished, used for its intended purpose, and returned to its sheath. The threat was neutralized. The weapon was secure. When the waiter returned with my drink, I lifted the heavy glass. The amber liquid caught the light. A small, contained fire. I held it up in the empty booth, a silent toast to the empty chair across from me, to the slow-moving river outside, to the quiet hum of a world that was, for the first time, entirely my own. To another table, I whispered to myself, the words a quiet puff of air in the silent booth, not the one I had paid $30,000 for, only to be dismissed, not the one I had been relegated to in the back of the room. This one, the one I had chosen, the one that was set for one, because one was, finally, enough. As I took my first sip, a flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. Across the river, along the far bank, the streetlights were coming on. One by one, they sparked to life against the deepening twilight, a string of pearls in the gathering dark. There was no grand ceremony, no dramatic flourish. They just appeared, precisely when they were needed, quietly, efficiently, just in time. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey and listening to the story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Ava's Revenge. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And if you really want to support the story, hit that hype button to help it get heard by more people. Your support means the world.